So I can tell you what exactly an exhausted woman in her 40s walks out of an appointment holding, because as a pharmacist, I fill the prescriptions. It's a sleep aid, it's an antidepressant, it's a stimulant, 3 prescriptions, and really none of them touches what's actually going on. And there's millions of women in their 30s and 40s being said these 3 things. You're just getting older, but they don't really look at something that's really small that could be affecting all of that. And today's guest, I think, is going to kind of straighten that out and give us a different insight. Today, I'm joined by Jen Scheinman. She's a director of science and communication at Timeline, and she's a registered nutrition. And I think she's got a lot of clinical insight to bring us about something we talk about all the time, which is mitochondria. And so, Jen, thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think it's women in hand up, women in 50s as well, where I think many decades of our life where we're really struggling, and we need to take a step back and think foundationally, like what is happening inside our body that is showing up in these different symptoms we're all seeking help for.
So right off the bat, so I want to ask you a question. So you tell people that the powerhouse of the cell line is really the least interesting thing that a mitochondria does. So finish that sentence. What's the part that everybody skips about mitochondria?
I think that I would love to rename and rebrand the mitochondria as like the CEO of the cell. So energy, they're called the powerhouse of the cell because of all the energy that they're creating. And that is by far a very, very important, right? Like we would not be alive without having energy. But they are master regulators of lots of different functions that are happening in the cell. So they are helping cells communicate better with each other. They're helping to regulate when a cell sort of goes into retirement. That's called apoptosis. They're actually playing a role in hormone production. So sort of bringing that back to, to hormone decline that women feel and men as well. So they're really doing lots of different things inside the cell. And we probably don't even know the half of it, to be honest.
So in terms, you mentioned, we talk about energy, what Scott talks about. What I heard is mitochondria must have a pretty complex communication system because they're involved so much in so many other things. What does that look like to you?
Yeah, so they're communicating, first of all, to each other, right? So they are responding to the energy demands of the cells, but they are also sending communication signals and molecules to both inside the cell, but what we're learning is that they're actually helping to regulate communication across cells as well. And what I think we don't think about often, and this is for sure, I'm curious, your training as well, right? Like as a dietitian, we memorize, like it was called the Krebs cycle, right? Like how energy is made. And I still have this visual of a textbook of this like one mitochondria that's in the cell, right? But our cells actually have thousands of mitochondria that are working in concert together. Every cell except, your red blood cells actually have mitochondria driving energy. The other thing that I think is so cool about them is they look different in each cell. So they're not exactly the same. And so they're really working in concert, as I said, to help our bodies to perform at their best.
So just like all of us, we age, and mitochondria age too. And there's something called mitophagy. And maybe people have never heard of this before. We just think the body just runs and guns and does what it does. But with mitophagy, what is your body actually doing when it works? Like what piles up or what goes wrong that actually triggers these mitochondria to do something different to themselves?
Yeah. So here's how I think about the mitochondria. And I know I just said that like they do a million things besides energy, but I'm going to focus on energy just for a second because this visual has really helped me and hopefully it will help your audience as well. So if we think of the mitochondria as a factory, right, like a power plant, and the fuel is the food that we eat and the oxygen in the air that we breathe. And it goes down, this very complex assembly line. And at the end, you get energy. ATP is what it's called. But just like any factory, that will go through wear and tear and breakdown. And that's happening during the aging process. And so what mitophagy is basically like the demolition guys. It's basically saying, okay, this energy factory has run its course. It is time. We maybe don't need to fully demolish it. Maybe we can actually recycle some of the things. We can break it down. But either way, it's helping to demolish, break down, keep what's working, get rid of what's not in this dysfunctional, old, broken down mitochondria, and then build new healthy ones. So like I said, I really like that visual of like, you've got this old, I think we all can visualize these like old factories that have been like, they're polluted, they're damaged, they're broken down, and we want to get rid of them and create new ones. But you might not have to completely demolish it, right? Like maybe you just need a new assembly line. Maybe you need some new workers. Maybe you need some new things. And that's really where mitophagy comes in.
So kind of what I hear, mitophagy is like this factory that's online. It's producing goods and everything's going good. But then over time, maybe they have like a CEO or it doesn't function as well. It begins to get broken and it slows down. But if it continues to produce goods and maybe they're not as good, is that maybe why people actually feel run down and fatigued? Because if their factory's running great, they're going to feel good. But if this factory's not performing, producing bad goods, is that how you see it?
Yeah, absolutely. If the factory's not at its tip-top shape, then we're going to run into issues. Or if the fuel source that you're giving, right? If you are eating a highly processed food diet. So there's sort of several things, just like in any factory, there's several points where breakdown can happen. But what I think is important for people to understand is even if you give it the most pristine fuel source and you have the best workers and the best CEO, there will still be wear and tear on that factory. And so you still need to have mitophagy happening, that recycling happening.
So as these factories begin to break down these mitochondria, what age does this cleanup process actually start failing? And like, is it age doing it? Or is there something else that we're doing to ourselves that's causing these mitochondria to start breaking down?
So the answer is both, right? Back to that analogy, no matter how perfectly you take care of a factory, there will be wear and tear, there will be pollution, there will be things that are happening that are contributing to the wear and tear of that. But then, of course, we do lifestyle things that are accelerating that. So aging is really starting younger than we think, right? I think we start to really notice it and feel it probably in our 40s, but in the background, in your 30s is when things are starting to slow down at a cellular level. So if you're also not taking good care of yourself, then that does feel more accelerated, more exacerbated. You're likely to notice these things potentially more severely or more sooner.
Gotcha. So this mitophagy process, is it a complicated process? Is it pretty simple? I mean, can it get dysfunctional itself? Obviously, it's got to get rid of garbage, but can it get dysregulated?
Yeah, so that's actually another thing that slows down with aging. So what happens as we get older is that we have this buildup of dysfunctional mitochondria, and then the cleanup crew starts to go out on retirement, right? So they are not working as well. And so you start to get this imbalance of dysfunctional mitochondria. So unfortunately, and yes, it's complicated, right? Like nothing in the body is signal. So there is a series of, signaling and communications that's happening in the cells that are saying like, hey, it's time to activate this process and to have that happen. Nothing in biology is simple. But the simple piece of it is there are things we can do to help activate that process as we get older.
So somebody who has mitochondria that are beginning to get dysfunctional, that need to be gotten rid of, i.e. this mitophagy says, what are the symptoms that show up in that person that looks like?
Yeah, so mitophagy is always happening in the background. So your body is constantly like repairing and renewing itself. But when you're starting to really have that buildup of dysfunctional mitochondria, the things that I think people will feel the most is this just sort of fatigue and malaise. I think we've all had periods of that, right? Where you're just tired, you're energetically zapped. And no matter how much sleep or how much coffee you are having, it's really hard to shake that feeling. And kind of along with that tends to be brain fog, poor recovery, or just, like feeling like you're just not able to give all you can in the gym anymore.
So what you just explained is what half the women that come in my pharmacy tell me that they're dealing with. They've gone to their doctor, they feel tired, they're run down, they're exhausted. And their doctor's like, well, it's either aging or this is just what it looks like. What do you, like, if we're going to actually look at mitochondrial function, and I don't expect you to get into like clinical type stuff here, but if somebody's going to go into a doctor and is like, I want to see if my mitochondria are working, what do you think a doctor would look at to kind of put those pieces together to look if the mitochondria are actually functioning the way they should?
So certainly it depends on who your doctor is also. I think you'll go into a lot of doctors and they will look at you like you're cuckoo and say, your mitochondria are fine. But the other thing is there is not really right now, but I think this will change in the next couple of years. There's not a good test for mitochondrial dysfunction. There are several tests that I've seen on the market popping up. Our science team feels like they're still really in the early ages and not necessarily things that, if you've got tons of money that you want to spend, that's great. But I think this clinical manifestation, like what you're feeling, what you're noticing, is probably the best sign for right now.
Gotcha. So a woman that's in perimenopause goes to her doctor. She gets diagnosed. She's got fatigue. She's got weight that won't move. Let's say she's got brain changes and even skin issues. Like those are all different problems and issues. But kind of from what I'm hearing, I just want to hear, could all those be driven by mitochondria?
I mean, yes and no. So there's several things that are happening at this point in a woman's life, and you can't really, and even in like men as well, right? Like aging is not one single thing, right? It's a multifaceted thing that's happening. So as women are aging, right, we have these hormonal changes. We are starting to lose estrogen. We're starting to lose progesterone. There might be changes in some other hormones as well. And that's really like the primary driver. Now, is mitochondrial a part of that? Absolutely. I believe so. But just focusing potentially, let's say, on like stimulating mitophagy is not going to solve all of those problems. Just like only taking HRT and not addressing anything else is not going to solve all those problems, right? There's lots of things that are happening. Like, as I said earlier, biology is very, very complex. And so there's going to be lots of different arms and levers that you're going to have to pull to feel how you used to feel.
Gotcha. So I think by now, if people haven't figured out, mitochondria are pretty important. And there's a lot of levers we can pull to affect mitochondria. But we've been kind of step-toeing and dancing around. I have a little bit talking about urolithin A. It's something that you're very familiar with. Just so the general audience understands, what exactly is urolithin A and how can that play a role here in this mitochondrial process?
Yeah, so it's a natural molecule. It's something that does exist in nature. This is not something that was, thought up in a lab, but it's a little complicated. So it's a molecule that's called a postbiotic. So what that means is you don't find this molecule directly in food. You can't go and eat, a salad and get urolithin A. What's happening instead is that your gut microbiome makes this molecule for you, which I think is just so cool that we are learning so much more about how all of the bacteria and the microorganisms that live in our gut, they're just doing so much for us. So when you eat certain foods like pomegranates, berries, and nuts, your gut microbiome will convert these molecules. They're called polyphenols. They'll convert them into urolithin A for us. But there's a catch. The vast majority of us don't have healthy gut microbiomes. We aren't making enough urolithin A. And even those few people who do have the right bacteria to make urolithin A, they're not having enough of the dietary precursors, right? Like our diets have changed so much. So this is just not a compound that for most people, and I would dare to say almost all people, they just don't have meaningful quantities that are in their bloodstream helping to trigger this mitophagy activation. And that's really the secret of what it's doing. It's helping to support that recycling process.
So I've heard you say before that like about a third of people can really make meaningful amounts of urolithin A from food. Walk me through that. Like what determines if someone is a producer or not a producer?
Yeah. And so it's a third of people can make it, not necessarily can make meaningful amounts. Like a third of people are making it. So to be transparent, we're not entirely sure like which bacteria. Like I can't say go take X brand of probiotic and you'll have the right gut microbiome to make it. What we suspect is it's probably a network of different types of bacteria. We do know that people who do stool testing and have very robust, diverse amounts of bacteria tend to be producers. But I can't pinpoint, you got to just take this one probiotic and that's going to be your solve. The other thing, and we'll talk a little bit about the clinical data about how urolithin A works, but the other thing that I think is important is even if, it turns out, because there are some labs that are doing testing, like stool testing, and they can test if you have like urolithin A in your stool, and if you have some of the species that we suspect are producers. To get the same therapeutic level that you would get from taking a dietary supplement, you would actually have to drink 6 cups of pomegranate juice a day. So that is something as a dietitian, like eat all the pomegranates that you want. I would never recommend somebody have 6 cups of pomegranate juice a day. So even if you've got a great gut, it's going to be hard from the diet to get a meaningful amount of this. That's doing the same thing you would get from supplementation. And, when I think of, put my dietitian hat on, I think of supplementation, it is meant to fill the gaps of things we can't get into diet alone. And I think is a perfect example of that.
That's good. So what I heard you say was we can go out and drink a ton of pomegranate. We can eat all the walnuts and these other things that we know are the polyphenols or have the polyphenols that can help drive these, but we really quite don't know what the gut bacteria are. And we still don't know, is there a genetic component to this at all? I'm just curiosity was just wondering.
I'm not aware of a genetic link here. There may be for sure, but I mean, what we do know is that you do pass your gut microbiome or your microbiome down, depending on if you are, a C-section birth, you are not getting inoculated the same way as you would through a vaginal birth, whether you're breastfed or not, right? So we know that certain things do get passed down by the mother to a newborn infant, or don't, depending on, how you're born and whether you're breast or bottle fed.
So from what I've read, urolithin A is one of the more fascinating postbiotics. It does some pretty amazing things. If you had to pick the one thing you think, man, this is the one thing that urolithin A that really nothing out there does. What's the one big clinical thing you think that urolithin A moves the needle on that really sets it apart from another supplement?
It's triggering that mitophagy process that we talked about. So there is no other molecule, at least that I'm aware of to date, that's been clinically proven to trigger mitophagy. So we do know that exercise and fasting, those are behaviors that will help to optimize that mitophagy process. But no other molecule. There's other molecules that do great things for the mitochondria. I'm not saying there's not other molecules for mitochondrial health, but specifically for that mitophagy, which I think of as foundational for mitochondrial health. You do have to get rid of those damaged mitochondria. They're not just sitting there. They're taking up valuable real estate. They are damaging other mitochondria. So you want to clean house. You want to build new ones. And then from that, we start to see these clinical benefits that will show up in different places. Because again, we have mitochondria everywhere in the body. So we'll start to see clinical benefits across the board.
So does urolithin A create or trigger mitophagy through traditional pathways? Or do you think it's something unique that urolithin A itself does that maybe something else doesn't? Let me ask you that.
No, it's doing it in a similar pathway to exercise. And the thing is that while everybody should exercise and move their body in some way, I mean, people don't, unfortunately, right? People don't exercise as much as they should. I think I read a statistic somewhere that it's 70% of people are not meeting the physical activity guidelines, which is, a sort of basic guideline for how much exercise you should have. So most people are not doing the basics. And most people aren't fasting either, right? Some people fasting is great. Some people don't. So this is hard to do without urolithin A.
So you mentioned that urolithin A can do some pretty amazing things. And to me, help me out with this. The balance of healthy mitochondria, is it a balance of new mitochondria being produced and old mitochondria being recycled? Is that balance I know is key? Where does urolithin A fit in there? Is it more on the mitophagy side? Does it do you have any data that show that it stimulates? I'm just curiosity. What does that look like for urolithin A?
Yeah, so we see data that's doing both. It's helping to restore that balance. So one of the first clinical studies that we did was a 1 month study, and it was to really demonstrate is mitophagy happening in humans? We had already demonstrated that it was happening in animals. And so we did this through muscle biopsies, because again, there's not great ways to measure mitochondrial health in a patient doctor setting, but in a clinical study, there is. So we take a piece of muscle and we can look at the mitochondria in that muscle. We can look at the genes that are regulating mitochondrial function and turnover. And what we see is that it's much significantly improved when you take urolithin A as compared to placebo.
Very interesting. So thinking about, you've already mentioned exercise is important. And it's my understanding too, as we exercise, our ability to generate more mitochondria, which is one of the big things exercise does, is basically hampered. It's kind of almost exercise resistant as we age. How does urolithin A play on that? Is whether a additive effect or compensatory in terms of helping someone who's aging, working out, but maybe could they get a little bit more benefit?
Yeah, so the clinical data that we have on middle-aged and older adults right now is in sedentary populations. But speaking from experience and doctors that are using this in practice, I strongly believe that it's giving an additive effect. And especially as you pointed out, as we're aging, I think we've got to pull a lot of levers. Diet, you've got to make sure as you're getting older, you got to do a lot more protein. As you're getting older, you've got to do some more strength training. And I think that's where supplementation with things like MitoPure can come in to help counterbalance that aging that's happening as we get older.
So looking at, let's say a woman who's already got many of these things we talked about, which could be definitely related to mitochondrial, but could also be hormonal related. What's that interplay? We've kind of talked about this a little bit, but then let's talk about kind of how urolithin A fits in. What does the estrogen piece connect with mitochondria, urolithin A? What would that look like for a woman who's trying to get that added advantage with hormone therapy? How does all that play together?
Yeah. So again, this is an area I'm super excited to have more clinical data on, because I think, women's health, unfortunately, has been under-researched. So what we do know is that we did a study in middle-aged adults. We did another study in older adults. And in both of those studies, the majority of participants were actually women. So we know that it is working on women at those various stages of their life. But the other thing that we know, and it's sort of a little bit more in preclinical data, it's not necessarily been proven in humans, but there is this link between estrogen and mitochondrial health. So the mitochondria actually are one of the first steps of estrogen production. Actually, all the sex steroid hormones, that first step of synthesis is happening inside the mitochondria. And it's bidirectional. There's actually receptors on your mitochondria for estrogen, right? So I think we just are in a place where we can say with confidence that this helps or this doesn't. But I think when we think about just the basic physiology, it makes sense to me that these two things would work really nicely together. HRT for women who can take it and need it, and then mitochondrial support as well.
So from what you know, so you would say if estrogen's basically a signal telling mitochondrial to run better, it would kind of make sense that like during perimenopause and especially menopause, that signal could get weaker because the estrogen's not there. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. Yep.
Okay. Very cool.
And then vice versa. If you don't have healthy mitochondria, they're not supporting estrogen production as well. And I just want to be clear with that, though, that you can't at this point in no matter how robustly you take care of your mitochondria, you can't overcome menopause at this point, right? It's still aging is still happening. But I think that by supporting mitochondrial health, we can support some of the symptoms that we feel that really feel for a lot of women, you've just been thrown in front of a bus, right? And I think there's a lot of things that you can do that are going to help you to feel a little bit better. And mitochondrial support for sure would play a role there.
That's good. So somebody's hearing all this, they're like, oh my gosh, this is me. And they're convinced by all this. What's step one? And it'll be buy the product. What's the free foundational move things that can be done first mitochondrial before we even would consider a product like urolithin A?
Yeah, I mean, it's boring to say, but the foundational things are diet and exercise and sleep and stress. They impact your entire health, but they impact your mitochondria as well. And so you can't out supplement, and even things like HRT is going to work better if you have these foundational things taken care of. And I know that sleep especially is pretty hard to nail down when you're going through perimenopause. That's sometimes takes a lot of work and a lot of different things to help move women so that they can actually get a good night's sleep. And stress, I think women in midlife, this is a really stressful time. You're sort of, in this sandwich generation of taking care of parents, taking care of kids, might be at the peak of your career. There's just a lot of stress too, but finding ways to cope with that. And then of course, exercise and diet. And then you can layer on these next steps. I think of them as sort of a triangular layer cake, right? You've got to get the foundations and then things that you can add on to help move the needle and get you feeling better.
So we've done all those things. We've optimized everything. We're okay, now I want to try this. So tell me a little bit about dose, how urolithin A comes realistically, actually what someone could expect. What's the timeline to start seeing benefits if you start taking a supplement like urolithin A, and say what tissues respond to urolithin A?
Yeah. So I'll start first with the tissue response. So right now we have clinical data that muscle tissue responds, and that immune cells respond. And topically, when you apply it topically, that skin cells respond. The next area is to really start studying other organ systems as well. But I think it's safe to think that if it's working on those three tissues, I don't know why it wouldn't work somewhere else. I think that, other organs, we just have to think about potentially dosing or, how long. But I think I can't make any statements without science backing it, but I think it's just safe to assume that. So that's, I think, the first thing. And then dosing. So we have studied urolithin A in 500 and 1,000 milligram doses. We've actually have studied 250 milligrams and there was no benefit. That wasn't enough. We've studied 2,000 milligrams, which while safe, the benefits started to plateau at 1,000 milligrams. So there's really no need to take more than 1,000 milligrams. Truthfully, there's better data, more comprehensive data at 1,000 milligrams. So I think particularly women who are struggling and in midlife, I would try starting with the 1,000 milligrams. And then once you start feeling better, you could potentially go down to 500. If it seems like, you've got pill fatigue and cost and all of those things. I mean, there is definitely benefit from 500. So I don't want to completely say that it's certainly not a waste of your time or your money to go with 500. So I think it's sort of the choices on your lifestyle. What are you doing? How severe are your symptoms?
So it's 500 to 1,000 milligrams once a day is where most of your data lives at. And just so I would probably explain, and you can see if you agree with me on this, just like hormone replacement or anything, our mitochondria didn't get where they're at today overnight. So we're not going to take a supplement for a week and be like, oh my gosh, it's amazing. They're all reset and everything's working great. It's going to take some time. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And I think that's especially important. I call it the Amazon Prime effect, where we've been feeling crummy for a while and we want to feel better tomorrow. So it takes some time to build up in the system. So I like to say at least 2 months, but potentially it could take 4 months. And it's different for different people. Some people, it's really, really obvious. For me, it was a little more subtle, but definitely noticeable. So my particular journey, the first thing I noticed was not getting sore at the gym anymore. And the other thing was I've seen someone I hadn't seen in a while, and I'd been complaining about fatigue. And she was like, how have you been feeling? And it was I maybe hadn't seen her in 6 months. So I was now that you're asking me that, I feel really good. It's not in your face. It's not like a light switch. It's much more of a dimmer, right? I felt like myself again, which is sometimes not obvious until you reflect and you're like, oh, I'm not crashing and burning on the drive home from work, or feeling like I need a nap at 3 p.m. I'm feeling pretty good.
Yeah, that was my own. I did the same thing. I took it for a couple months and thought I didn't really notice much. And then I stopped taking it and I was like, well, wait a minute. I'm a pretty high energy person, but I felt the fatigue and tiredness a little quicker. And I'm like, whoa, maybe it was doing something. So quite surprisingly,
we hear that often too. Because, again, when you're turning up the dimmer, you don't necessarily, it's not as obvious until you then flip the switch and take it away. So I do hear that very often too.
So as a postbiotic, one of the things that surprises me the most, that it kind of caught me off guard, was the muscle data, the strength gains, and without really changing a lot of workout. Tell me what data you have on that, because I find that kind of interesting. Everybody's trying to get in better shape and stuff nowadays. And if we can do something that's additive to a workout, or even if we don't have as much time to work out, what does the data say for that?
Yeah. Well, so the reason why it's working there, right, is because it's working on the mitochondria. And so the muscles require tons of energy every time you go to the gym or take a walk, or honestly, even just sit still. So muscle is really where the most robust data sits. So we have done clinical trials in both middle-aged and older adults. And what we see in their sedentary populations, and what we see in both of those areas, significant improvements in muscle health without changing diet or exercise. So I think that's really great. In no way, shape, or form is this meant to be a change for exercise. But if you're feeling really tired and struggling to get to the gym, this might help bridge that gap. So that's the first set of data we see. Improvements in muscle strength, that was specifically with 500 milligrams, and that was in middle-aged adults. And then muscle endurance is with older adults, and that was with 1,000 milligrams. We then started to get this question, well, all right, we know it works in sedentary middle-aged and older adults, but what about athletic populations, people who are working out already? Because especially if you are a professional athlete, you're actually doing a lot of stress to your mitochondria. They're working overtime to keep up with those demands. And there's 3 clinical studies. And in fact, Timeline only played a role in one of these studies, but these 2 other studies looked at varying populations of younger professional athletes, some strength trained athletes, some professional soccer players, some endurance Olympians. And sort of across the board, we start to see things like recovery. We start to see things and same thing with muscle improvements in this population as well, which is really hard to do in a professionally trained athlete to move the needle. So, so I suspect that the average sort of worker outer who is, just doing, to be fit and to build muscle, but, they're career is not on the lines, like I would imagine that they would get some benefit here as well.
No, that's good insight. And another thing that kind of caught me off guard when I first learned about your product a couple of years ago was the effect it has on the skin. Obviously, there's a lot that goes on in the skin. Tell me how the skin benefits from urolithin A.
Yeah. So the way I've been told the story is that customers were trying to say their skin looks better after taking the supplement. And well, gosh, yeah, the skin needs tons of energy for this like cell turnover and for protecting us from the environment. And that energy is coming from the mitochondria. So we started studying urolithin A topically. And what happens is you are still getting that mitophagy. It's that same mechanism of action. The benefit is just showing up more localized in the skin. So what that ultimately means is we see in just 2 weeks, again, this is with topical, not with the supplement, we see visible signs of aging are reduced. And when that study goes out to 8 weeks, it's statistically significant improvements in wrinkle depth and wrinkle volume. The other thing that I think is really interesting from a topical standpoint is when you're using it topically, the damaging effects of the sun, so all this, it's called like erythema and inflammation and redness, resolves much more quickly with urolithin A applied after UV exposure. Especially when we think of a lot of the traditional, healthy skin aging compounds like tretinoin or the retinols, you have to be really careful in the sun, and it's really irritating. So this is very gentle and also is safe to use in the sun. I mean, you still would want to use some sort of sunblock. So I think that's really interesting as well.
So you could add this almost like an add-on to your skincare regimen because of the benefits that it has.
Yeah, you can add it on. You could replace. So we have a whole suite for our, we have a direct-to-consumer line, and then we also have a professional line. So the direct-to-consumer line, there is several skincare products, everything from a cleanser to an exfoliator to creams and serums. And so you could potentially use the whole system. They all have urolithin A, and then they're paired with some other actives in there. Or you could just, take the serum and use that kind of with everything else that you're using. And then the professional line, we have it's an extra strength, or it's 1,000 milligram dose for the supplement. And then we're formulating right now a more concentrated urolithin A serum that would be, again, just for providers to have in their office. And that will be launching. I'm not sure when this is going to air, but that will be launching the end of September.
Oh, very cool. So better skin coming to a place near you. So that sounds good. Excellent. All right. I'm going to play skeptical pharmacist for a second. So the supplement aisle, it's full of hype and thin evidence type products. And especially in this line, what separates, I would say, urolithin A from like NAD boosters, NMM, CoQ10, which has been pushed forever, like is the cellular energy pill. Those have all been over. So what really separates urolithin A from those type things?
It's the mechanism of action. So urolithin A, as I said earlier, is really the only molecule that we know today, at least in human studies, that is triggering that recycling process and helping to build newer ones. So when I think of like creating more mitochondria or more energy, I should say, right? Like you could build more energy factories. You could make that energy factory work better. But that energy factory is still going to break down. So like when I think of CoQ10, it's helping to make that energy. If you have a healthy mitochondria, it's helping to make that mitochondria have more energy. NAD boosters are also helping to make a healthy mitochondria continue to work. It's also helping with creating new ones as well. What's different about MitoPure is it's getting rid of that dysfunctional mitochondria and then helping to build new ones. So I actually think there's a place where you might use, like I use CoQ10 myself as well, right? That I wish there was one single fix for everything in the world, but there's not. And so there's several different things that are going to support the health of your mitochondria. So I think of MitoPure or urolithin A, I should say, first. And then these other things will probably work better when you have a better foundation.
Well, I like what you said. So from what I heard is that these other things, NAD, CoQ10, those type things can better help that electron transport chain generate more energy, ATP. I mean, that's one of the things we talked about that mitochondria do. But in your case, it's urolithin A can actually help the body make more mitochondria, actually help those mitochondria produce better, but more importantly, recycle them so we have the freshest mitochondria out there so it can do its job. Is that kind of what I heard you say?
Yeah, exactly. So if I think of like, again, that energy factory analogy, right? Things like CoQ10 are going to be like your workers on the factory, right? But if the factory is broken, those workers can only do so much, right? But also if you have a pristine factory, but you don't have those workers, that's a problem as well, which is why there might be a place where you need both of these things. But that energy factory will still break down. And then urolithin A is the demo, brings them, gets rid of the damage, helps to build a new one.
No, that's good. So we've talked about all the benefit of urolithin A, but let's say, so I don't want people to expect a miracle or setting themselves up for disappointment. What can people expect urolithin A not to do? Let's put it that way. I know it's kind of a crazy question.
Yeah,
But
I mean, it's not a replacement for diet or exercise. It is not like miracle in the sense that like you're going to take it today and you're going to feel amazing tomorrow, right? And it's not like the one thing. It is like an important thing, and there are several things that you have to do to take care of your health. So I think of it as like there's sort of certain foundational supplements that I take that are in addition to my diet, in addition to my exercise, that are in addition to that. And urolithin A is one of those sort of foundational things that I take every day to build on all the other things that I'm doing.
so mitochondrial health, you talk about this all the time. What's the one health belief related to mitochondrial health that's out there everywhere online right now, but like you kind of would like to push back on?
Oh, that's a good question. I think the belief that and I think it's not so much a belief, like I actually think that there's just not enough attention out there on mitochondrial health. I think that's actually my biggest thing, is that like your mitochondria don't matter. I think that's where I would push back. Of course, there's always going to be like, this is the one supplement, or this is the thing you need to do, right? Like there's always going to be that in every area of your health. But I think that I'm actually more excited about where the conversation about mitochondrial health is going, because there is so much great research about the importance of mitochondrial health for every aspect of aging. And it's starting to move the conversation out of the lab and into like mainstream, like we're having today. And so more people are picking up on it and thinking about it. So that's what I think is not enough conversation. We need more of it.
Very good. So Jen, I know like for you, this has been a little personal because you've been on Mitopure for years. And you came to this after like your long journey with Lyme, and you had to fight for what you believed. Tell me what that experience has taught you about maybe the system, how it treats women, but more importantly, how does it change how you interact when you work with patients yourself?
For me, the biggest lesson in my Lyme journey was just the power of finding a practitioner that even if they don't know what is wrong, that they will like get in the trenches and hold your hands. Because I think whether it's autoimmune conditions, whether it's Lyme or mold, or whether it's just perimenopause, like too often women are just told, this is part of aging, or I don't know what this is, or there's nothing that we can do. And that is so defeating because we know ourselves and we know how we feel. And I just remember very much this was sort of how I got introduced into integrative and functional nutrition and integrative and functional medicine, is I had a doctor who was like, I hear you. Like, I believe you. And just knowing that, whether it was placebo effect or not, like that was just the change of my journey. And so I approach everybody, not just patients, but everybody in life with like empathy. Like everybody has their own lived experience. And I feel very blessed that I found a practitioner, and that practitioner was able to help me, because I do think that there is tons of people who have found practitioners, but they aren't helpful, or they just haven't found a practitioner. So I feel very blessed. But I think empathy is the main driver there for sure.
Appreciate you sharing that. That means a lot. So if a woman's listening now, she's exhausted, she feels dismissed and wondering if it's just life now or this is just what to expect, what's the one thing that you would want her to do this week? What's the one thing maybe you'd want her to change? Or maybe the one thing you want her to stop believing that you've kind of learned on this journey for yourself doing what you're doing?
Is don't give up. Sometimes it just takes a long time. And to just, I think right now there's the pros and cons of social media, right? There's definitely like a lot of noise out there, but I think it also connects people to potential providers, to, even like Facebook groups, and where people are sort of struggling and may have recommendations of providers that can help you. And the other thing, besides not give up and advocate for yourself, is baby steps, right? Like if there's just one thing you can do, like get outside and take a walk, or, one meal that maybe you are adding some more protein or some more fiber, right? It doesn't have to be this all or nothing. There's a lot of research that shows that baby steps actually do accumulate and have a snowball effect. And in fact, they're probably much better for behavior change than like try to do everything at once. So be kind to yourself, be gentle, set realistic expectations, and don't give up.
I love that. That's awesome. So if people want to learn more about Mitopure, what it does, and all the things you talked about today, where can they find that?
Yeah, so I would go to timeline.com. We also, for anybody who's listening who might be a provider, you can also go to pro.timeline.com, which is where we have our professional line. And up there, you will see all of the science. It's all, one thing I do want to say is the scientific credibility, like all the stuff that I just shared, this is in published research journals. So like you can go, you can research this, you can take it to your doctor. It's not something that we just like did in a small lab and like never did anything. These are published in medical journals that are very well respected. And all of that is up and available on the website. And that's probably the best way. Also social media, timeline, longevity. There's just lots of great places to learn more.
Well, this has been awesome. I hope any woman that struggles with fatigue and tiredness realizes today, sometimes it isn't hormones. You really have to get to the cellular level of what's going on. And the mitochondria are really powerful now in terms of just helping us live good, healthy lives as we get older. And I think today brought some information. So if people found this useful, I hope they share it with friends and family. And Jen, I just want to thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your insight on this.
Yeah, I'm so glad to be here. And I hope people found it useful too.
Awesome. I want to thank you so much. And with our podcast, like you said, be sure to comment, be sure to like and share. And then always, as always, just seeking the truth about how the body works. Thanks so much.